I think it was a comment made out of being a bit sour that Lewis left the way he did. Because Toto had no prior notice. I mean, he said there's a 2-week notice from Carlos Sainz Sr. that he got, but that's not much. Leclerc and he specifically talked about it. Leclerc and Lando Norris had already signed the contracts. Otherwise, he would have tried to get those guys on board. I mean, let's get to the part of him hating Lewis Hamilton then, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the first thing was he talked about the shelf life thing. And I think
will I read the quote that, just so people have context? So this is the quote from Autosport, and I think, anyway. He said, there's a reason why we only signed a 1+1 year contract. We're in a sport where cognitive sharpness is extremely important, and I believe everyone has a shelf life, so I need to look at the next generation. It's the same in football managers like Sir Alex Ferguson on Pep
Guardiola.
Yeah, I'm not a huge football fan anymore, as you can tell. They anticipated it in the performance of their top stars and brought in junior players that drove the team for the next years. So that was the kind of quote that everyone had a meltdown about.
Yes. So, okay, first, I have a few thoughts about it. First of all, let's talk about the first thing. The 1+1 year contract. Okay, just to get a few facts on the table. Do you know the last 2 contracts that Lewis has signed? With Mercedes, the last 2 contract extensions, they've been 1+1.
Yeah.
It's not the first one.
That was the first ones were Lewis's decisions, as far as I remember as well. He wanted a 1+1.
Yeah.
So for the team to continue that on isn't that ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's
he kind of set the precedent.
The precedent, right?
Yeah. So
and again, everyone forgets the basic detail because I think since 2018 or 2017, every time Lewis has had a rolled on contract, it's been 1+1. 1+1. 1+1. Every time we've heard it, it's 1+1. Even pre-2021, he had the contract signed, it was again 1+1. So the thing is, that's the norm. That's the norm that's been there. So the question
if Lewis had have asked for a longer contract back then, he would have gotten it. But he didn't want that. So...
Yeah. Exactly. And if you don't want that, you set a tone of something, and then later, again, I don't think Lewis has made these claims, and I don't think publicly we've heard anywhere that he's talked about the fact that he felt betrayed, he didn't get a longer contract or something like this.
Yeah.
It's the fans and some very stupid reporting on that front. Because look, no one wants to give the context, and the context is this was the precedent that was set by Lewis. And that's what Mercedes followed with. Again, you can say that maybe Lewis wanted a long-term contract right now, and Mercedes was not willing to do that for one reason or the other.
Well, the thing is, you have to bear in mind, you have to see it from both sides, which is Lewis's reason for doing that was he knows how quickly performance can change in Formula One with a team.
Yep.
And as much as Lewis loved Mercedes, everyone thought that Lewis would be with Mercedes forever. As soon as the performance dropped off, Lewis essentially decided relatively quickly to leave the team and go somewhere else. So basically that is why he set that precedent of being able to assess the performance continuously. And Mercedes, from their point of view, then obviously realized, and Toto realized, this is probably a good way of doing things as well, because now we can assess the performance on a basic year-by-year, year-by-year setting.
Your rolling contract. That's how it's going right now.
So Lewis surely knew when he started setting that precedent that it could be used against him at some point.
Yeah.
And if he didn't, he should have, or his manager should have. So, look, I mean, the performance works both ways. He's expecting the team to perform for him. If he's not performing, absolutely destroying his teammate, then obviously Mercedes is going to say, well, let's do the same thing with you and say, let's do this on a year by year. And it's a fair...
That's
F1 is it's not a charity game. It's a competitive sport, it's...
And lest we forget, he's getting paid around 8 times what George is getting at Mercedes. And basically both are getting the similar level of performance.
Yeah,
that should tell you everything.
His fans will tell you that you need to focus on the intangibles, which are the marketing.
It does not make up for that much. Let's be very, very honest. If that much is...
I don't want to get into the big argument that I have all the time where people say Lewis is bigger than Formula One, but he's not. Like, the only thing they can point out to prove that in any sense, I think, is that Lewis has more Instagram followers, I think, than F1. And it's like, that proves nothing. That just proves that F1 has done a really shit job with their Instagram. That doesn't prove that, it's like, oh yeah, he has 36 million followers. It's like, great, 200 million people watch the races. So why hasn't he got them all if he's bigger than F1? Like, what are you talking about? So,
and you have
Mercedes is bigger than Lewis Hamilton.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
More people know what Mercedes is by an enormous amount than know who Lewis Hamilton is. And these are the same people who will tell you that Lewis Hamilton is bigger than Ferrari. The only sports person who has ever come close to being bigger than their sport is probably Michael Jordan. And even then, it's hard to say because Michael Jordan getting bigger made basketball bigger. So
it's always a trade-off, right? And the thing is, you have to understand this thing. But again, the basic point here is Mercedes did not. This entire claim that Mercedes was just looking to get rid of Lewis. You do not get rid of Lewis Hamilton. It just does not work that way. And sometimes you have to understand those basic things. And again, what Toto is saying, again, I'll come to the second part where he says that we're in a sport where cognitive sharpness is important, everyone has a shelf life and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a comment made out of being a bit sour that Lewis left the way he did. Because Toto had no prior notice. I mean, he said there's a 2-week notice from Carlos Sainz Sr. that he got, but that's not much. Leclerc and he specifically talked about it. Leclerc and Lando Norris had already signed the contracts. Otherwise, he would have tried to get those guys on board.
Mm-hmm.
What through the entire sequence of events, there's only one key takeaway. I think that Toto did not see it coming, and that's why he's being a bit salty. Honestly,
I think as well. Thing. Like in terms of, we'll talk about the cognitive thing in a minute, but in terms of the contracts, you can kind of see why it's. I mean, like basically Lewis not giving him the heads up also robbed him of being able to kind of nab a Leclerc, because as soon as Ferrari knew that Hamilton was interested, they basically there and then made sure that the contract with Leclerc was signed, because Leclerc was signing his contract within that kind of before that 2-week window or around that 2-week window. So, and Leclerc knew when he was signing his contract that the Hamilton job was basically a done deal. Yeah. Leclerc has talked about this. So essentially he could be a bit salty because it's kind of like, well, I've given you a title winning car for 8 seasons. Like, I've gave you everything you needed, and you can't give me a few weeks to make sure that if you're going, I have the best options, So you can understand why he's a bit salty there, Yeah. And one last thing on the whole 1+1 thing that we didn't mention is that Lewis also kind of, like Mercedes also kind of allowed Lewis to continue on when that was clearly never the plan. The reason that Russell started in 2022 was that basically, I think the assumption from everybody was Hamilton. Sorry, you okay? Is the sound gone?
Anyways.
Oh, okay.
Something interesting.
But yeah, no worries. But basically, the entire expectation from everybody was Hamilton would win an 8th in 2021 and then retire. And maybe do 2022 as kind of a transition year. But George was always the guy to come in and basically take over from Lewis. That was always the plan. And then all of a sudden that didn't happen. And Lewis stuck around, I think, longer than expected. And
I think they don't really mind Lewis sticking around longer than expected. It's just that...
Of course not, no.
Yeah, I think it's just the whole... It's the baggage, I'll be honest. It's just the baggage.
But it's also you've got to hedge your bets, right? If Lewis thought he was dropping out after 2021, then you have to think to yourself, well, this guy was kind of 1 foot out the door already. Yeah. So how long is it going to be before he triggers that? So maybe let's do a shorter contract and make sure that we are prepared. And then, of course, he's a little bit salty because it's like, we did this so that we were prepared, and then you pulled the rug out from under us with 2 weeks' notice. Like, of course he's going to be a bit salty about it.
And even 2 weeks' notice is not what Lewis gave. It's just that he got to know from Carlos Sainz. So
that's got to hurt, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's
mean,
gotta hurt.
A partnership almost a decade-long partnership, and it ends this
The
way.
most successful partnership in history, like, realistically.
Yeah,
of
it
the
is.
sport.
It is.
Yeah,
In terms of statistics, championships, wins, whatever, that this is the best. And you have to understand that at that point in time, Toto is obviously not going to be impressed with what has been said and the way the whole thing has gone out. So
He hears it from Carlos Sainz Sr. instead of from Lewis. Like, that's gotta be kind of like, come on.
yeah, it's like, what
Like,
the fuck are we doing? And there's a
you
basic
can-
courtesy, right?
And again, like, I don't want to say it's like that makes Lewis look terrible. I understand that you're negotiating in these ways. Like, I
It's
get
business. Honestly,
I get
Formula
that.
One is a business. You have to treat it that way. And the thing is, out of all of this, terming Lewis Hamilton a victim, what are we?
Is ridiculous.
Who are we kidding?
Yeah.
Like,
I don't
who are
know
we
how many
kidding?
victims you know who get $100 million a year to drive a Ferrari.
And who were getting almost half of that at Mercedes. I mean, he
Yeah.
was still the highest paid driver in Formula One when he
Yeah.
left Mercedes. So
So-
somewhere down the line, you have to ask that: how is this guy a victim?
There's two
The-
words that have been absolutely overused in the past few years. One of them is Nazi, the other one's victim, and I'm sick of both of them.
No. For me, it's victim and experiments.
Oh,
So the-
well, in
these are the two.
Formula One, yeah, but I mean globally. Yeah.
We'll save that for some other podcast.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
As for the cognitive decline, it's an accurate comment. I mean, I think the only person who hasn't had that decline cognitively that you could really argue is probably Alonso, and even then, that's because he took some time away from the sport and came back, I think.
I think the true answer of whether Alonso has the cognitive decline or if Lewis has the cognitive decline, I think it's going to come next season for both. Maybe not for Alonso, because again he'll be teamed up with.
Well, Alonso's
Picker.
also in, but Alonso also has he's 100% in the mindset that we're going to have a shit car next year. So
Yeah.
you're not going to see him give 110%. You know, so
For me, the worry with Alonso is there's one asterisk, and you can look at both. You can look at it both ways, because his partnership with Esteban Ocon, it wasn't a one-way street. It wasn't as if he dominated him every weekend. It was more like, you can say, 60-40 in favor of
Yeah.
Alonso. And once you have that, either it means Esteban Ocon is very good or Alonso has dropped down a peg. Now, which one is that? We'll ultimately know it once he is in a competitive car fighting the likes of Max and others.
yeah.
Until we have that, we cannot really make that judgment. For Lewis, I think the drop has been there anyways, since you can say, I think the drop, what happens is, ideally what I have seen with so many athletes is, the drop is first mentally. And I think with Lewis it happened in 2022 when there was mentally the shoulders dropped because he realized the car was not there.
Yeah.
Then he picked himself up because the Mercedes started improving, and by the end of the season he was there and thereabouts. 2023 was fine, but if you look at it quite carefully, George, whose one major issue was that he lacked the ultimate pace of Lewis, he was getting there. And this season we've seen George improve, take another step.
George has been the comprehensively better driver this season.
Yeah.
And the only metric that doesn't show that is the wins. But in reality, that's because of technical issues as opposed to actual, you know.
Yeah.
So
The thing is, there's been an improvement from George and there's been a decline from Lewis. Now, whether the decline is mental in terms of he does not give a fuck, or this decline is maybe
actual
permanent.
age.
It's something permanent, and that's something
we won't
we'll
know that
see
till
next season.
maybe. And
Next
we
season.
won't really see it till halfway through next season, because like Lewis constantly starts off a season kind of on like behind. Like 2021 was his best
I don't
start
think
to a
he can
season
afford
ever.
to do that. At Ferrari, I don't think he can afford to
That's
do
going to
that
be the
because
problem, but I think he will. I think we've seen this basically
It's natural.
every season from Lewis. He kind of warms into a season, and you're right. I don't think he can afford to do it at Ferrari, because the Ferrari guys are very, in Red Bull terms, like they're very trigger happy. And John Elkann has basically put his balls on the chopping block to say, I want this guy in for $100 million a year. And if we get to the half point of the season and Leclerc is double points of Lewis, That's going to be very hard to justify.
And at the same time, if Ollie Behrman is just smashing Ocon out of the water, after his stint at Haas this season, what I have seen in 3 races, he might be able to do that. And if he does, they have a ready-made replacement.
And then you've got as well, and then you've got John Elkann as well, seeing report after report and massive social media following after massive social media following, basically saying that Ferrari are sabotaging Hamilton. Like, you've got to look at that from a shareholder point of view and go, this isn't worth it. Like, this is costing us more than it should be.
Yeah. I think that might happen, by the way. I think
is my sound okay, by the way? I think I knocked the audio level. It didn't change, did it?
Okay, no, it's fine. It's perfect. Yeah. I think it's better we talked about the fans than Toto Wolff's comment, because I think this one riled up a lot of people, and again, understandably so. But I think he also has a point as well. So
he would know better than any fan.
Yeah,
he's got all the data, Like,
and it's not only that. I mean, he's had the emails, and he's had countless emails of utter nonsense. So what?
If you're a fan and you don't think that perhaps he's dropped off, then the only argument to say he hasn't dropped off or that he's not performing at his best is that, well, there's 2 arguments. You can either say that George is absolutely spectacular, but no Hamilton fan will admit that. So that, for me, is the obvious answer, is that George is just driving at an extremely high level and that, Hamilton's not there anymore. Or you can say it's sabotage, which some people in the comments have said. And that doesn't make any sense. Their argument was he dropped off so that basically Toto's got to prove to the sponsors that Hamilton's not worth keeping anyway. And that doesn't make any sense. So what your plan is to basically make sure that Hamilton looks bad, which makes Mercedes look bad, which means that sponsors will leave anyway. Like, what's the plan here? The only way, as I said to someone, the only way that would make sense would be if George was winning Grand Prix after Grand Prix after Grand Prix, so that you could turn to the sponsors and go, look, Hamilton's performing badly, but we've got George here. Yeah. So it doesn't. If you're doing that, then you're doing it really badly. Like, And
I think it's very evident that they are not doing it, because you can see it in the races. You can see it how everything goes on. It's far too evident that they are giving both of them as much of an opportunity as possible. But I think right now, at least publicly, I think Toto has reached his breaking point where he can't be asked about coming on the radio after the race and saying, yeah, Lewis, we had a bad race, this happened, that happened. And because look, if in the same race you have your teammate who is almost winning and you're basically scrambling to finish P10, that's on you. As simple as that. Doesn't mean how many old parts you have, whatever. Okay, one thing that a lot of people don't know, almost 99% of the parts are same. It's basically 1% parts that tend to be different, and which can maybe contribute to a 10th at max, but not more than that. So if you are thinking that a second lap gap is coming from the old parts or whatever, they're not. And they're not even coming from the setup. So
and even if you wanted to say right now that the setups, like maybe some setup information isn't being shared or whatever, you could make that argument now because we're getting close to Hamilton leaving and that stuff always happens. But that doesn't give you any inkling as to why it was like that at the start of the season. Like there's no
Precisely.
So like it would be fine if it just started happening now, but the fact that it's happened the whole way through the season, that just paints one side to the story, which is that George is just performing better than Hamilton. There is no other excuse for it.
And
simple as,
And again, by the way, a lot of people are going to be pissed in the comments and
say,
it was a Lewis. You guys really hate Lewis Hamilton. We talk about this the same way about almost every driver. So stay tuned is what all I'll say. Anyways,
go back and look at the other podcasts if you want. It's evident that we don't hate Lewis Hamilton.
I mean, it's just I can't even repeat the same nonsense again and again and again.
Yeah, I just don't care. Comment away. It helps with engagement. Thanks.
Yeah.